Hi everyone, Aidan here at the etrailer. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Yakima OnRamp LX. This is going to be a platform style bike rack capable of carrying up to 2 heavy e-bikes. And like the name suggests, it comes included with a ramp here, so loading and unloading those heavy e-bikes is a lot easier. You don't have to lift it all yourself, so let's check it out. So the OnRamp LX is Yakima's second iteration of the OnRamp, and it's going to be the new version that you'll see. And one of the big pieces they changed was the ramp. They made it quite a bit wider here, so bikes with wider tires are going to work really well on here. On the old ramp, they tended to get stuck, but it's going to work essentially the same way. If you're not familiar with it, it's got these teeth on the top end that'll grab into some slots at the end of your tray. And it'll work on either side of the tray too. So we were able to wheel the bike off front tire first, and we can hook it into that slot and load it up front tire first too. That's locked in, so I'll grab my bike and roll it up. Now as I push this up the ramp, obviously you still got some weight of the bike to push, but it's not near as bad as when you're lifting it all. And you may run into issues if you've got two bikes kind of having to tilt it outward like this to either avoid your other bike or the center mast, but it's not too bad overall. First thing we'll do though is just take the clamp on our center mast, wrap that around our bike frame wherever it lines up the best, and cinch it down with the strap to hold the whole thing upright and keep it in place for us. And the secondary contact points are the wheel straps. The trays actually have these slots to tuck them into, so when you're ramping up or down, they don't get in the way of your tires. It's a huge improvement on this new OnRamp. But they'll just feed through the tire or through the wheel and pull down at a 45-degree angle, giving us a lot of stability because it pulls the bike down and in on both sides. And the other thing is that you've got wheel chocks now. So as it's pulling, it's going to wedge the bike further into those wheel chocks. And that's one of the pieces that helps give us an 80-pound weight capacity per bike. Now that 80-pound weight capacity is super impressive. It's going to work great with most of your passenger vehicles, but I would advise, depending on the vehicle you're putting this on, just checking your tongue weight and what your vehicle can handle, because two 80-pound bikes plus an almost 50-pound bike rack on its own is going to be a fair amount of tongue weight. And if your vehicle can't take that, then this rack isn't going to work to its fullest capacity. But that 80 pounds is also RV tested and approved, so you can put this on some motorhomes and stuff too. And with an off-road capacity of 48 pounds per bike, you're not going to get e-bikes if you're going off-road, but you can still take it and load some heavier bikes there too. And the ramp, when you're done using it, also stores on the bike rack. So you can just lift it up to release the teeth. It can sometimes get caught on your tire if it's a little bit bigger. We've got 29-inch tires on there right now. But this will collapse down just by loosening up these two hand knobs and removing them. And the ramp separates into two pieces to either be in that expanded state or slide them together into this collapsed state here. I don't love the two-piece design, especially when you consider that now you also have two hand knobs, so 4 separate pieces total to hang on to, but the ramp's pretty lightweight and easy to carry. The one thing I'll say is before you tighten that one hand knob up, just check these center slots here. Make sure they're aligned, because that's going to be the mounting location for our ramp. And it's a bit of a tight fit between the vehicle here, but you can access it through the bottom of the bikes too. That mounting stud will face in towards that first tray. So we'll just slide the rack over and use the remaining hand knob to tighten it down. That way it's always around. You don't have to worry about forgetting it because it just stores directly on the rack. And I know we covered the attachment points for the bike rack, but I do want to say they do a great job at holding those bikes steady. Like I said, those straps at the bottom pulling down and in give a lot of that stronger hold to keep the bikes from shaking around too much. But with the way it attaches primarily around the frame here, That's going to lend itself really well to e-bikes that have maybe cargo racks or fenders, because we're not relying on the wheels in any way for an attachment point. Frame contact, though, does mean we probably want to avoid carbon frames, and just be conscious of it if you've got a really nice paint job, because that frame contact can wear away at that over time. But we do have pads here, and the straps I really like are extra long, so even on a bike like we have on our inner cradle, if this thicker portion was the part that lined up best with our clamp, we'd have plenty of strap to wrap around it. But with that in mind, let's drive around with both of these bikes loaded so we can see how it actually performs over some bumps and normal driving. So overall, I'm really impressed with how it handled on road. On the bumps, of course, there's a little bit of movement, and when turning rapidly side to side, we see a bit of sway in the rack, but the bikes are solid in the rack, and that little bit of movement we see is pretty standard for really any hitch-mounted bike rack, especially ones that have points of movement. And the OnRamp is no different. It's got an ability to fold up for storage when it's not in use, but also tilt away from the vehicle with the bikes loaded. It's a great way to access your cargo area. And to control that, there's some pins located right by the ramp we saw earlier. Now, this will be a two-person job, especially if you've got heavier e-bikes. I've got Ian helping me out, but first we've got a pin on the passenger side that you can just pull right out. It's just a little safety stopper, and the rack will still stay upright with that removed. Ian's gonna help by pinching that pin there, and that will be the final release point to allow us to lower the rack down and away from the vehicle. Thank you, Ian. And this allows us to open up, say, a tailgate or a back hatch. And it's got a really solid tilt. The vehicle we have it on today is a Ford Maverick. It's actually my own personal truck, and speaking from experience, almost no bike racks work well with a tilt-away feature allowing me to fully open the tailgate. So the fact that this one does work lets me know it's a really solid tilting mechanism. And I expect it would work really well on pretty much any vehicle you put it on. But if you had something like a Jeep, a Bronco, maybe a Sprinter van, something a bit more abnormal, you can always pick up Yakima's swing-away arm. This rack is compatible with that and would give you a great amount of clearance if the tilt wasn't enough. When you're ready to get driving again, though, just grab somewhere stable like that mast and push up on the rack until that pinch pin seats itself back in place. But I'd recommend getting a good look at it, because while I'm taking my hands off it right now, I can see that pinch pin isn't fully reseated. So I'm going to shake the rack around a little bit, kind of wiggle it back and forth, and you should hopefully be able to see that. There you go, seat down just a little bit more. It's one thing I've noticed, that this just doesn't like to grab fully, and your second set of hands could be really helpful for getting that secondary safety pin back in, because a little bit of lift on the rack goes a long way here, but it's pretty hard to see it all together. So Ian's giving a little bit of pressure on the rack, and I can focus on getting that pin back through. With all those things in mind, you might be considering other bike racks that meet similar criteria. Because if you're looking for a ramped bike rack, you're also probably concerned about ease of operation. And one that I would really consider looking into is the Hollywood Rack's Destination. I think where it's going to be a lot easier is the tilt-away. The OnRamp here, I think, just doesn't do a great job with their tilting mechanism. It's hard to operate on your own. You really shouldn't operate it on your own. And even then, it's just hard to reach. Whereas on the Destination, that mechanism to tilt it is really accessible and very easy to do with one person, even with two e-bikes loaded up. I also do like their ramp quite a bit too. It's just a telescoping ramp, so it does collapse and expand and make it easier to store, but it doesn't separate into two separate pieces, which is something I could see getting pretty annoying on the OnRamp. I think it's easy enough to do, but if you're in a hurry or you happen to drop one of those hand knobs, it then just becomes a chore of finding it, especially if it rolls under your car. So that's some things I really like about the Hollywood Rack's Destination. But something to be aware there is that I don't think the build quality is as nice as Yakima. Some of the pins and clips you'll see later as we unload the bikes are really nice on here. And you get that ramp storage. The the destination doesn't have anywhere to put the ramp, so you will have to put that in your car somewhere. As far as tire sizes, you can see the trays are quite wide here and will work up to a 5-inch tire width, while still having some more narrow grooves on those wheel chocks for, say, a narrow road bike tire. And the straps, of course, are long enough to accommodate those fat tire bikes too. And with a maximum diameter for your wheel of 29 inches, it can fit a wide range, but just something to know, if you're maxing out both that diameter and the tire width, you might run into some weird clearance issues with the ramp attachment, like I was showing earlier with our larger 29-inch wheels. And these trays can be shifted around and expanded to work with a maximum wheelbase of up to 54 inches. Just know when you're hooking up and setting up, you'll want the tires to sit on the outside edges of these wheel chocks that we saw earlier. And once we fold the rack up, I'll show you how you can adjust those trays a bit. And from a side profile here, you can see the stadium style design to our trays, where that rear one will sit up a bit higher than the front one. It's really helpful for bike-to-bike clearance because handlebars and seats tend to hit one another, but when the trays are staggered like that, you don't run into the issue as often. Not to mention it will help with your vehicle ground clearance rising up at the end there. But that ground clearance specifically will change depending on your vehicle. So be sure to check our site and our other vehicle test fits to see if we have tested this on your year, make, model, and you can see what that ground clearance would be. One thing I can give you now though is the distance we add to the back of the vehicle. Now I'll take my measurement from the center of the hitch pin hole, and for us, from the center of the hitch pin hole to the furthest point out at the end of the rack is about 33 inches. You can take that measurement to your own vehicle, your own hitch, and figure out how much it's going to add to the back, letting you know what kind of obstructions it's going to cause when parking or just driving around. But to fold the rack up for storage, like I said earlier, you got to first put down the mast. There's going to be a gray pull pin, and you can just tilt that down, making sure that your cradles here are adjusted so they don't hit the trays on the bike rack. So I'm just going to slide this one down a bit and adjust it, but that'll lay flat like that, and we'll just go to the series of pins we use to tilt the rack away. This time much easier to do on your own because there's no bikes in your way, and you can fold the rack up right now. Again, just making sure you pop the passenger side pin in as well to make sure it stays locked into that stored position. But here, we'll go again to the center of the hitch pin hole, and our new furthest point out, I'm gonna count these cradles here just because it's easiest to have them poking through like that, but it's gonna be about 16 inches. Cuts our distance added down by about half, so that's pretty good. Doesn't add too much length to the vehicle, much easier to drive around with. But I do also wanna see the closest point, which will probably be that ramp. That's gonna be 5.5 inches to the center of the hitch pin hole. That'll be helpful for figuring out if you have the bumper clearance on your own vehicle. For cars that have a really recessed hitch and a larger back bumper, it's really important to check. And on the back here, we can much better see the adjustment for our wheelbase and our trays. On the driver's side of the rack, there's gonna be these screws and 3 threaded holes on the bottom of the tray to choose from. This will control the movement of the tray side to side, and if you find yourself running into bike contact issues, you can offset the trays from one another or line it up better with the center mast since it is so offset. The piece on the side here, the passenger side, is just a hand knob. You don't have to fully remove that, just loosen it up, and it'll allow you to slide the tray in or out like that. And that's gonna control the spread of those wheel chocks to match up to our wheelbase a bit more precisely. No fixed intervals here, so you can adjust it to whatever you need and tighten it back down when you've got it set. Now I'll say, setting our bikes up, the process is a little bit of back and forth because you might get the bike up there and realize that the only way to get the proper alignment is to remove it and fully undo that screw there and shift the entire tray. It's a bit of a headache, I'll be honest, but once it's done, and you have it set to your bikes, it stays put, and you know you're gonna get a strong hold from there on out. Now down at the bottom of the rack, we can see this is working with our 2" by 2" receiver tube, and it comes with a locking anti-rattle bolt to keep things solid and secure in that hitch. It's worth mentioning that Yakima does make an 1¼ version of this rack. It is a completely separate part because the weight capacities do drop a tad on that 1¼ version, so it's something to keep in mind. That lock at the hitch is the only one included with the rack, so no real way to lock up your bikes to the rack if you tend to leave them on there unattended. But you can easily pick up a cable lock, and this framing underneath the rack gives you a great point to attach a cable lock to. Yakima even gives you a little graphic on the top side showing you to wrap it around here if you choose to add that. Another nice add-on you might consider, you'll notice that there's some rubber tabs that cover up mounting holes on the side. Yakima makes a light kit and a license plate relocation bracket, and these two locations are where you'd mount it on the OnRamp LX. So with this being a more bulky bike rack, probably blocking your license plate, maybe even obstructing your taillights a bit, that light kit would be a really great thing to add here, because not only are we keeping our license plate visible for states that require it, but our lights can be more visible too, relocated to the outer surface of the rack where people can better see what we're doing when we're making turns or maybe making an emergency stop. You will need 4-pole wiring to make that work, and if you don't have 4-pole wiring for your vehicle, you can totally find that here at eTrailer. Just plug your vehicle information into our fit guide to find the right kit for you, and you can even use our dealer locator tool if you're not comfortable doing that install yourself. But overall, I actually really like the OnRamp LX. I think it's a pretty solid bike rack, and it's gonna really help if you need a ramp for loading and unloading those heavier e-bikes up to 80 pounds. It's a pretty impressive capacity, and most racks that are rated that high, I tend to not like as much. So I think this one does a pretty good job at combining some nice looks and some ease of use features. And I know I mentioned earlier the Hollywood Rack's Destination e-bike rack. I think it's a really solid comparison. And if you want to see more of those two racks head to head, point for point, you can check out Evangeline's full comparison between the two on our site. I think that's going to be a really helpful tool if you really can't decide between the two. She goes into much more detail, but I think either way you go, you're going to get a solid rack. But if you liked everything you saw here today, this has just been our look at the 2" hitch version of the Yakima OnRamp LX. My name's Aidan, and thanks for watching.